as Jarell mentioned, I'm Eric Bronner. I'm the founder and chief operating officer for Veterans for Political Innovation. That's a mouthful. What are we all about? We're about mobilizing veterans and supporters from across the country and across the political spectrum to advocate for three powerful, nonpartisan election innovations that will make our politics less toxic through healthy competition. That's what we're working on.
So Eric, can you tell us about those three initiatives or those three reforms that you guys are working on to pass?
Yes, so the three reforms we are laser focused on are open primaries, voting innovations such as ranked choice voting. There's others out there as well. And the combination of those two things, which is either called Final Four or Final Five voting.
These open primaries, would those be for state elections only?
They would be for everything. That's a great question. So it would be for state and federal offices. And that's one of many things most people don't understand about elections, right? We have at least three levels of elections going on. You have local elections, which is your city or your county. You have state elections, and then you have the federal elections for US Congress, for the House of Representatives. And then really the presidential election is kind of a whole nother animal, so to speak.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Now, I was recently speaking to someone about this concept of open primaries, and one of their concerns was, okay, so Illinois is a heavily Democratic state.
Right.
So one of the concerns that this young lady posed to me was, with open primaries, how could you prevent the Republican Party manipulating the election and having all Republican candidates? Is that a genuine concern? And if so, how would you address that?
Yeah, so sometimes we hear that concern here in Missouri as well. It's something similar, maybe slightly different. People talk about strategic voting. One thing we have to be clear about, we're talking about primary elections. Most Americans, one, don't participate in primary elections. Two, they're really not well understood. Most people don't understand that, for example, in 2020, 83% of our Congress was elected by 10% of eligible voters, because only 10% of eligible voters participated in primary elections, and they were in districts that are so red or so blue that whoever won that primary election is automatically the winner. So to answer your question, sometime in Missouri, for example, as an independent voter, I can go into our August primary and they'll ask me, do you want the Democratic ballot or do you want the Republican ballot? To which I'd like to respond, well, that's actually my ballot. I'm an independent voter. It shouldn't belong to the parties. It should belong to we the people.
So the strategic voting, how does that work? Is that like a coordinated, I guess, conspiracy, we could say? Like some groups are like getting voters together and telling them, hey, vote for the weakest link on the other side so he can win, and then be faced off with the stronger candidate from the other side in the general election?
Really, Jarell, from my research, there's only anecdotal evidence of this happening a couple times and not in massive numbers.
She was fully on board with the ranked choice voting.
Okay.
Now, can you tell us why ranked choice voting might be the preferred method of electoral reform versus open primaries? I believe this is also a belief you share as well, right?
It is. I'm most excited about combining an open primary where the top 4 or 5 candidates go to the general, regardless of party, and then using a ranked choice ballot in the general election in November. And sometimes ranked choice voting is also called instant runoff voting, because that's what a ranked ballot enables, an instant runoff, which means if no candidate gets over 50%, the lowest candidate is done. And then anyone who voted for that candidate as their first choice, their votes are now transferred to their second choice until one remaining candidate has over 50%. Ranked choice voting is great for so many reasons. The negative attack ads in the system I just described, top 4 or final 5 voting, negative attack ads don't work.
They have an incentive to actually like come up with ideas and base their platform off ideas that they're going to work versus, distracting and deflecting and, like you said, mudslinging. I think it
Yes,
would clean up our elections and make them much more respectable.
it will. I mean, more competition in every other industry. That's how the customer gets better results, right? We need healthy competition in politics. We need to get away from Coke versus Pepsi. Some people might want to drink RC Cola or Hanson's or whatever,
Right.
right? But we don't
Right.
even give them that choice in our two-party duopoly.
Most definitely. Most definitely.
Veterans for Political Innovation, we work with state coalition partners to pass Final Four or Final Five voting in states across the country. We're really excited because Alaska has adopted Final Four voting. Wisconsin has legislation pending. And now there's a ballot amendment in Missouri called Better Elections Missouri. It's for the Alaska model. So for state and federal elections, a top 4 open primary plus ranked choice voting. We're bringing that to Missouri, and we're bringing Final Five voting to Nevada via a ballot amendment right now as well.
Okay, so right now you're pushing for a ballot amendment.
In Missouri, so the 300,000 signatures, technically you need about 170,000 signatures.
You wanted more because you wanted in case they got purged, you wanted to make sure you have more than enough.
And the initiative petition language normally gets drafted by an attorney.
Okay.
There's 5 paragraphs on our petition. You can read the whole thing at betterelectionsmo.org.org.
I guess, we're trying to understand, the process from conception of an idea all the way through passage of the amendment on the ballot. Do you mind maybe just going into that, like on the surface level a little bit?
I mean, the idea really comes from this book that I shared with you, the Politics Industry book. Katherine Gehl, Wisconsin businesswoman, Michael Porter, Harvard Business School professor. They were the ones that they outline all the problems with modern politics in America: partisan gridlock, toxic polarization. Congress is getting less and less done by any measure. Why is that? Because of partisan primary elections. Everyone who gets elected to office, their biggest fear is being primaried. It's now a verb, by someone farther to their right or farther to their left. So they were the ones who proposed Final Five voting, which is a top 5 open primary and ranked choice voting as the solution. And there's people who've read this book and this research that are so excited about it that they started ballot amendments in Alaska, Nevada. There's legislation pending in Wisconsin and Missouri. There's a ballot amendment we're running. It's going to incentivize problem solving.
Right.
It's going to incentivize common sense compromise. It's going to incentivize a new type of candidate that just doesn't exist in our current divided duopoly.
These primary voters, who do they normally consist of?
There's some interesting data and polling data about this. This is a report I got. It's called The Hidden Tribes of America from 2018. And it's by a group called More in Common. And they did this really in-depth research of over 8,000 Americans. And what they found was that they broke it up into 7 groups. The group on the farthest right is devout conservatives. They're the most conservative, devout conservatives. That's 6% of our population. The group on the farthest left is progressive activists. These 2 groups, listen to what they have in common. The whitest group, devout conservatives on the far right. The second whitest group, the progressive activists on the far left. The wealthiest group, progressive activists on the far left. The second wealthiest group, devout conservatives. The most active on social media, both of these extremes. The most likely to participate in partisan primary elections, both of these extremes. This is why we are being torn apart by 2 sides of the same coin in America. The summary of why all of this is important: more choice equals more power for voters. And right now, if you're an independent or unaffiliated voter, you are a second-class citizen in your own democracy. Your taxpayer dollars that pay for your elections, some of them you don't even get to fully participate in. In Colorado, there's more registered unaffiliated voters than Democrats and Republicans combined. So this is the next wave. Independent, unaffiliated voters, fastest growing demographic in almost every single state. So the 2-party duopoly does not even make sense anymore, but it's up to us, all of us, to advocate to change the system itself. We need to stop yelling at each other about hot button issues that are being used just to tear us apart. We need to come together and fix the system itself as a top priority.